Thank you, Sydney, very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining this evening. I know it's a tough time of the evening to sometimes sneak away, so we're excited to have you on. And I'm particularly excited about this group of esteemed colleagues. I know that everyone is going to walk away with all of their educational questions answered, and they're going to have the perfect plan based on the feedback from all the panelists. No, I'm just kidding. Tonight, we're just really hoping to spark some conversation, some dialogue. I think all of us know, and especially those of us with children, know that this is a tough time to make decisions. And it feels very much like right now, the decisions largely stem around what is going to be the right developmental choice, and is that at odds with what kind of educational experience children are going to have in the fall. And because it's such an unprecedented time, I think families are really scrambling between a number of alternatives, all of which have pros and cons. So for background purposes, I'm going to be the moderator tonight. I run a company called O'Connor Professional Group. We do in-home services for people with behavioral health issues, from children with autism to adults with mental health issues. Happy to talk offline about our services. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to go around, describe a little bit about what they do, anything they want to share about how they're operating right now during the pandemic, and then we're going to offer some questions for each of the panelists, and we're going to hope that some of our audience members may chat in some additional questions. So with that, I'm going to start with Jay and then ask him to pass it to Dr. Goldberg, and then to Michael, and then to Dr. Flamenbaum. So Jay, do you want to give a little bit of background about yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, Arden. I'm Jay Bacrania, co-founder, CEO, and owner of Signet Education. Signet is a comprehensive educational partner for our families. That means that we help them plan their academic journey and support students with tutoring, test prep, and admissions consulting and academic coaching throughout high school. So our goal is really to help families have a more meaningful and more successful and ideally less stressful journey through the high school process. We've been in business for about 15 years, and we've helped thousands and thousands and thousands probably of students over the last 15 years and had a great time doing it. As of March 15th, we went completely remote, and I think I may be the only person in the company who's actually seen somebody in person. And that's because I get the difficult cases, and I have a student that's has very severe ADHD, and so meeting in person was really important. That said, we found the transition really smooth, and we've seen a lot of other companies doing that as well. So that's where we are for COVID. So I'll pass it to Dr. Goldberg.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Ilan Goldberg. I'm a board-certified psychiatrist in private practice in Lexington, Massachusetts. And about 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, I started a program in Wellesley called Semester Off, a program specifically for 17 to 25-year-olds who are taking time away from college and need something different to do that also includes some academics and executive functioning skills development and yoga and exercise and career counseling and group team building and a few other things as well that we sort of put together in a highly comprehensive, holistic fashion to give them a fun, memorable experience for 14 weeks. We run 3 semesters a year, so while we're sort of in our 6th year, we're going on our 18th group this spring. And we were able to function through COVID. We, like the rest of the world, went remote in mid-March and finished out our spring semester that way. And then we ran a summer semester, and our summer semester was mostly in-person, outdoors, and taking advantage of trees and nature and shade that way. And we did still have a Zoom day every week in case we needed to pivot back to Zoom. We already kind of had our foot planted in that territory, and we incorporated virtual reality into what we do. And I'll speak a little bit more about that a little later. So thank you.
Great. So I'm Michael Delman, and say a little bit about myself and about my company, Beyond BookSmart. So I'm an educator, first and foremost. I taught for about a decade, started a charter school in Framingham, Massachusetts, which is partnered with Outward Bound. It's still there, and it's a great school. I then started a company that I am still the CEO of, called Beyond BookSmart. It's the nation's largest executive function coaching company. What we do is we help students with executive function skills, these self-management skills that students and adults use, all of us use, to achieve goals. So how to manage emotions and how to focus and how to plan and prioritize and reflect and become kind of better at what we do. I guess it was a couple of years ago now, I came out with my first book called Your Kid's Gonna Be Okay, Building Executive Function Skills in the Age of Attention. Got to do a tour on that. It was a lot of fun. I guess, the big thing now, as we've all made this shift since March, we've been exclusively online. We were about 2/3 online before. And so the transition for us has been pretty seamless. And I think it's gone rather well. So looking forward to sharing some of the things we've learned as we go. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Flamenbaum.
I think
Had
you're
to take off the lens cap. Sorry about that. Boy, that really dates me, doesn't it? My name is Dr. Evan Flamenbaum. I am the co-owner of Academics West, which is really the only accredited therapeutic school in New York City. And what that means is that we developed a program that was able to be a standalone treatment center that also integrated the full array of academics. So kids get, we have about 7 psychologists and social workers and speech therapists and art therapists who work in a really integrated fashion with our educators. So kids get a lot of executive functioning remediation, which I think we all in this panel realize is like the ingredient that gets kids traction. They get treatment while sustaining their education. We are on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. We will be opening up, we're all gonna talk in various ways about the necessity for, like Jay was saying, some of our kids really, really needed to be in person. So if rates stay low, we will continue to have our students come. We have put in all sorts of technology I hope never to have paid for, but we have now so that kids can live stream. If they need to, they can be hybrid. And I think, what's going to come out of this world is, just I think more options about how people connect and receive information. And I'm excited to talk more about how we all interrelate and what we've learned, honestly, over the last 6 months.
Thank you very much. So as I mentioned in the opening, I think the parents we're seeing are overwhelmed by choices and choices they never had to expect to make. And I think one of the things that we see are people sort of panicking about what's the right decision? What is the perfect plan? Whether it's for this fall, whether it's for next year. And obviously that depends on a lot of factors. And we're never going to have, as much as I joke about it, probably all the perfect answers as to whether pandemic pods are the way to go, private school, public school, what are your best options? I guess I want to start out by figuring out from each of you, what are the questions that you as a parent would suggest, or what are the questions you would suggest that parents ask themselves as they're determining what educational options might be ideal for the fall? And I'm going to start with Michael. And Michael, if you don't mind passing it to a colleague, and we can just ping around everybody to answer that question.
Sure, Arden, thanks. I think the question I would begin with is, what's going to be the least stressful option for your family? You could certainly consider what's going to be the option that's going to provide us with the greatest emotional bang, educational bang. But I think you want to look at what would be the cost benefit analysis, if you will. So you may find something that's incredibly intense and focused and comprehensive, and that might at first sound really appealing. But if they're not doing an outstanding job managing the emotional side and a holistic approach, and I think you've already heard from both Evan and Ilan about how kind of the comprehensiveness in outdoor programs and therapeutics, those kinds of things. And I think Jay and I aim to do that in our work as well. I think you're missing the boat. We all begin, unfortunately, take this as a hand model of the brain. Some of you may be familiar with this. This part, the prefrontal cortex right here, that's the part where the executive function skills are that we think is where we make decisions from. It's the rational, you know, what's the best choice? Let me weigh everything. But underneath that is the amygdala, which is this fight or flight reaction. And if parents are stressed, kids are stressed, you can't really capitalize. So whether you're working, you know, with us or Jay's group or, you know, or Ilan's or Evan's or anyone else's, the first thing you want to look for is who is going to be really understanding that we are emotional creatures at root. And that's the place to begin. I know, Arden, in your work with your group, that's critical to success. I begin there. And I guess I'll just popcorn it over to whoever wants to take it next. To anyone want to just give me a little wave or just go? Jay.
Yeah. So thanks, Michael. I think that's spot on. If you're not in a place where you can be in some kind of relative peaceful state, at least sometimes, learning is not going to happen. The way that I think about this question is really about trying to understand what the goals are for the year. So let's assume we start with Michael's starting point of starting with a low stress option. From there, I would suggest thinking about across a student's life. We generally will break a student's life down into several categories. So academic, social, family, health, pre-professional. I like to put in spiritual. What feeds the spirit doesn't have to be religious at all, but just something that makes a student more human. Relationships, music, art, that sort of thing. And so what I like to encourage families to think about is, let's think about that whole student and what that student needs this coming semester, or even this coming month, frankly, because it's difficult at this point to plan a semester ahead necessarily. And so thinking across those dimensions, we can, what I would encourage families to do is actually create their own dimensions and evaluate each option against those particular dimensions that are important, and try to take what is a big, hairy, challenging problem and break it down into some specifics that we can compare against each other. It's probably not going to be a right answer, but at the very least, it gives parents a framework to be able to think through and hopefully decide. So that's what I would add to that. I'll pass it over to Dr. Flamenbaum.
Thanks, Jake. And we always talk at Academics West about the amygdala moment, you know, and it's true. It's the precursor to sort of stable learning is being calm. And so, you know, that's like where mindfulness and executive functioning come together. But, you know, so I went to my daughter is starting high school, and I went to her principal's, she had a PowerPoint, and the first slide said, tofu is not cheese. I'm like, what the hell? And her point was managing expectations. We are not having cheese right now. It might look like cheese, but it's not. And, you know, I think when Academics West as a school had to figure out how to open, we had to figure out how to manage expectation. It's going to be different, but some of the conventional wisdom still held, which is, I mean, all of us on this panel have heard a million times, oh, that's such a good school. Well, there is no good school. There's only like the good school for your kid. If you really want that good school, just get the decal, put on your car. Like everybody will think so. And so one of the things I would advise parents, because I just went through this excruciating process, but all these kind of things actually make your programs better, which is we had to send to the Department of Health and the Department of Education our reopening plans. Look at your school's reopening plans. Is it well thought out? Is it organized? Is it safe? Does it look like it's really thoughtful? And that should give you a lot of reassurance about what they've done. And the other thing is, what is their virtual learning plan? The last 5 or 6 months taught us a lot. We all got a lot. I mean, Ilan's doing like virtual, you know, very cool stuff. We've all come up with really great ideas. What have they come up with? Are they still, is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? If it's still asynchronous, and you know, that to me is like obviously not as good. And then I think there's a big logistical element. What works for your family? It has to, and I think this is really where we started this conversation. Does somebody have to go to work? Does somebody who has to do the caretaking? So I think you really have to think about what works for the student, what works for the family, what they have prepared, And also, what did the last 5 months say? Did it, we have a lot of kids, the virtual learning was fantastic. Something about it was super adaptive. I have a bunch of kids who absolutely fell off a cliff. So we now have sort of longitudinal data about what works for your kid, and really, and with people like us, process it, like really dig into it. But I think there's a lot of information parents, every school used the summer to get organized. What did your school do, and does it fit you, and does it seem to work based on what worked in the past, is what I would probably in a nutshell tell parents. And it's going to be tofu for a while. We'll get back to cheese. Promise. I promise.
I think you made an interesting point, Dr. Flamenbaum, around some students thriving in a virtual learning environment and some students struggling with it. Does anybody want to comment on what characteristics are important to consider, either age or learning style, anything like that? Like, where have you seen trends of students doing better with virtual learning, and where have you seen students, or their profiles of students where this may not be a match for their learning style?
Can I take first stab? So, I think that the ADHD population has been identified as that population that tends to lose attention easily. And when there's a lot of distractions around, as there inevitably are when you're trying to learn from home, that sort of as a group has struggled with this. I've actually found in my students on the autism spectrum that there's a divide. There were some that, exactly like what Dr. Flamenbaum said, kind of fell off the cliff. When we went virtual in mid-March, there were some students that kind of like just were beyond our grasp. And as many efforts as we tried making, they just weren't going to take to this new modality. And that was that. And there are others, and they tended to have some degree of autism, very highly rigid in their thinking. There are other, but what I want, another point I want to make is that you can't just kind of cast globally based on diagnosis, and that it's a diagnosis that is overlaid on an individual. And another of our former students who is on the spectrum, I've been in touch with him. He got straight A's at BU in the spring semester, and then straight A's again this summer. He loves the virtual environment. He doesn't have to socialize. He doesn't have to make small talk. He doesn't have to do all the other little things that we often have to do in life. And he could just focus on learning and on studying and things. And so I think that there really is a split here, just like anything else. I mean, when some like big thing goes off, some people respond really well and some people respond really poorly. And I think that, we're all kind of trying to figure out who does which and what are the different sort of underlying patterns there.
Can I make a clinical addition to that, which I found really interesting? And I want to, Dr. Goldberg, I wonder what you think. So one of the groups I found who did fantastic were the kids pre-COVID, the school refusal kids, the social anxiety group. And I think we have to be really careful, because all of a sudden I had a group of kids who were really, really in distress, and then they did fantastic, but it was adaptive only in this environment. My fear is that when they go back non-virtual, they're sort of spring-loaded to fall apart. So all my cute social anxiety kids were like, there's such an incredible abatement of symptomology, but it's a mixed blessing. So I think we have to keep an eye on all this. It's going to be really interesting.
I'm sorry, Jay, if you don't mind, I'll say this one thing. Yeah, I think them having the relief of not having their heads banged against the wall, it might feel worse when they have to go back to bang their heads against the wall. It is a tough, so to speak, it is I was thinking the same thing about that population. The thing that I would just add is if kids were already having trouble pre-pandemic and pre kind of lockdown with things like managing homework, that's a challenge for them. The ADHD population, impulsive, distracted, combined. Now they've got to manage that all day on their own without the structure, without the scaffolding, without a teacher who at least can establish routines, as opposed to a parent who's trying to manage their own life and their own work from home situation, perhaps. Yeah, I think the virtual situation is that much harder because it's constant. It's all the time. It's not just after, after they get home. We don't have the school as like, and loco parentis, there is no alternative parent. It's the parent is actually now more like and teacher parent and loco teacher or whatever. We've got the Jay, I know you could get the Latin on that for me.
I think loco teacher is actually probably correct.
Probably feels that way for the teachers, right? Yeah, and loco teacher. But right, I mean, essentially parents are playing dual roles now, and it's that much more difficult. So, yeah, Jay, did you want to jump in on that one too?
I'll just throw one anecdote in. So there's a student that I work with that awesome student, and he actually had a lot of trouble in school, but after coming back home, there was a lot more structure. And so it's kind of paradoxical that he did better at home than he did at school. And so I think, Dr. Goldberg, you mentioned this. I think you've got any learning kind of profile or challenges, and that's on top of an individual, which is also on top of the different context. And so I think it's really difficult to say exactly what's going to move the needle for a student in a positive or negative direction. So we've seen a couple of instances at Signet where students who were having a lot of trouble on campus now no longer have that trouble at home, or vice versa, students who were amazing on campus at home are just falling apart because something has changed in that big multifactorial equation. So I think I would say looking to past evidence as a guide for the future might be a really smart move for this.
So forgive me because I'm going a little off script here, but I like where this conversation is going. So I guess one thought that I have based on this is, I think it's interesting that the pandemic came at a time where there's been a lot of media attention paid to how much screen time kids are getting. And now we're being forced to do a lot of things virtually. As you're thinking about parents trying to balance, I think about it in sort of two buckets, either for kids who are in a hybrid model or for parents who are choosing to homeschool and perhaps using some virtual tools. Like, how do you guys think about best practices as it applies to and I'm thinking more grade school age children, so young children up through, 18 years old. How do you think about, I guess, two questions. One is sort of keeping attention in the virtual world, maybe for the younger kids and best practices there. And then for older kids, how do you think about avoiding creating more screen time, like more of the same, which parents are already concerned about, if that makes sense?
I'm happy to talk about the elementary kids if you want me to, because I don't think you guys deal with them as much, but our younger kids tend to be externalizers. We have the ADHD, the ODD, the kids who are really, they're throwing the cake at the kindergarten party, And one of the things we found that was interesting, it was a tough transition to the virtual world, and we had to get very creative. And simply what the goal was is to take the classroom, and we forget the classroom has so many visual prompts, all the cues, the teacher, the stuff on the walls. I mean, classrooms, especially good educators, really set them up to speak. We had to do a lot of what we call like antecedent oriented stuff, which is, the chart on the wall that told them what's going on next, or the test. We needed to really do very explicit prep, previewing. What are we going to do today? What's going to happen next? What's going to happen? So when we did more antecedent work, like let's be really explicit about what's about to happen every step of the way, things got a lot better because we just went, oh, let's go virtual. Why isn't this working? Because so many of the things didn't travel. And then we had to figure out, well, how do we intervene when it goes wrong? And you start looking at the functionality. We use breakout rooms to have one-on-ones. That, first of all, like we said in the beforehand, we would mute people. That was told, but we would put them in a breakout room with a therapist and de-escalate and calm down, have a little chat time, bring them back. So we actually were able to do that and use the functionality, which was really, really. So you had to be very intentional about setting up the antecedents so that they knew what was going on. And that really was a lot of creative problem solving.
I can jump in and take give a one perspective on high school kids. I haven't solved this problem yet, so I can't necessarily say I'm going to give everybody the solution. But I think when it comes to the high school students and the college students, I think partnership to me is the right word, and really trying to turn the conversation from students being the enforcers or knowing what's right and saying, well, this is what I think, how much screen time I think you should have, to creating, and it's not always possible. It's not always possible at home. It's not even always possible with a professional. But if you can, creating a conversation with the student around, well, what's working for you? What are your goals? Because most students know if they're spending more time on TikTok than they feel like they really want to, they know that, but you need to create a safe enough space for them to be able to say that. And in the most ideal, again, I don't know if this is possible in all cases, is to have some kind of collaboration where the student says, well, you know what? I really probably shouldn't be on my device after 10 o'clock. That really makes my day go south tomorrow, the next day. And so mom and dad, like, can you help me with this? Or the parents say, look, we want to give you flexibility, but we have a rule that in this house, all devices go in the basket at this time. And that's the rule. So how are we going to work together? Because I think if you set up a kind of an enforcer oppositional relationship around technology, the technology is so powerful. It is designed to just like addict all of us. And we all know this, that I think it just creates a really challenging situation. So my 2 cents on this, especially with the older kids, is to try for some kind of self-aware partnership.
I love what you're saying there, Jay. And I kind of feel like I want to take on specifically 7th graders because they're just such a challenging age specifically. But I'll go with middle school generally, and then maybe Ilan, you take the whole gamut or what you'd like. But one of the things that I try to talk to parents about is sequencing. And I think it's important to establish a family culture, the way Jay was kind of, implying that, hey, in our family, this is what we do. Here's what we do. And there's a why behind it. But let's have a conversation about that, because maybe part of the culture that you want is that you're trying to fade support and build kids who can think independently for themselves and buy in. One of the things that can be part of the culture is a sequence. We generally aim to get our work done before the play. So I had a parent one time who said, should I not let my child go out? He was a junior in high school, actually. Should I not let him go out this Friday night because he didn't get his work done during the week? And I said, you should change the word because to the word until. So you can't go out Friday night until you've got the work done that you're behind in. And that just changed everything, because now it wasn't punitive. It was just simply a natural consequence. And I think the kids buy that. They understand that, they do get it, that the world has consequences, and that's actually our role as parents, is to help them see that and connect those dots. But what they don't want, as Jay said, is just have an enforcer and someone that comes in punitively. So I think we can find a way to do that by saying, well, A comes before B. When you're done with A, you can go on and do B.
That was great. Thanks, Michael. I think that when it comes to screen time, we have to be more selective about, how we're talking about that, and talk about good screen time and bad screen time, talk about excessive screen time versus necessary screen time. I think that the conversation sort of needs to, happen amongst educators in those ways, and educator to parents, parents to children, because we are in this world where screens are necessary in order for us to stay safe. And we all just have to acknowledge that fact. And, we would be quite the Luddites if we just abandoned technology at this point and just kind of stayed in our houses and never saw anybody. Or were, taking outlandish risks or something, being out and things. And so you know, I think that that's an important part of the conversation. And, you know, I don't teach elementary school, but I do have an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old at home. So I'm actively engaged in these conversations all the time. And this is what my wife and I are trying to do. And I think that, you know, with our 7-year-old, for instance, we have to talk about productive screen time versus non-productive screen time. And, you know, before COVID, there was no such thing as productive screen time for a 7-year-old. And now there is, you know, and so I think that we just have to adapt our vocabulary a bit and sort of address, you know, people that at different ages in ways that we didn't before COVID. I think that there's also a piece, I mean, I was actually really very interested by what you were saying, Dr. Flamenbaum, about the classroom itself and your description about how, you know, good educators are so mindful about how they set up that space and are sort of constantly teaching. You're like immersing students in life lessons and grammar lessons and the other things that they put on the bulletin boards and things. And I think all of that is true. It's particularly true for younger students. What I also think is important is that good teaching is good communicating and good and really being in there with your student and the relationship. And this is something that I reinforce constantly in our staff meetings, that it's all about the relationship. It's all about the communication. And I would argue that we can accomplish that nearly to the same degree on Zoom and on other virtual technologies. And, you know, when you have that in place, then you can take students to different places intellectually and whatnot. When you know, pause and ask and put people on the spot and then ask them a follow-up question and a follow-up question to that, and then put another student on the spot and say, well, what do you think about what Johnny just said? You know, and the students start to get the point that like, whoa, I can't just like zone out and turn my camera off or whatever. I actually have to be engaged because I might be put on the hot seat, you know, just like in the classroom. I mean, a good teacher does that in the classroom, in my opinion. And I think that can be accomplished this way too.
So can I tell you some of the creative stuff we did that was really, you know, and I have to give a nod to, and if any of you have spent a lot of time with special educators, they are amazing. Their skill set and mentality is like awesome. So we had to get creative and we started doing fun reading sessions, and we had these guys coming on and doing calisthenics, and like there was one that was like the dead cockroach and they all got on the floor. We did virtual scavenger hunts, art projects, we did yoga, we would do mindful Mondays. So I agree with Dr. Goldberg. This is about being creative to achieve the same goal. And one of the I'm wondering if any of you guys have anecdotes on this. One of the fascinating byproducts of the sort of virtual, you know, forced virtual schooling was I had a lot of parents who we spent years telling them, you know, your kid struggles with this, he has a hard time with this, she does it. And they're like, no, we don't. And then they're like, oh my God, I have a front row seat to everything you've told me for like 5 years. The collaboration, because we were in vivo with the parents, really, in many instances, they were like, wow, I get it now. We became more collaborative and interventive because of what was going on. And we would send them data all day. They're like, yeah, that doesn't happen. So again, I think there's some really adaptive parts. It's only limited by our imagination and creativity.
Great, thank you. So I think one big topic that's been in the media right now is around socialization and, you know, how are kids going to get socialization given the way education is perceived to be this fall? I'd love for Dr. Goldberg and Dr. Flamenbaum to give some comments on that. Maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Goldberg.
Sure. So when we went 100% virtual in mid-March and we converted to Zoom, I mean, on day one when we were 100% Zoom, we got almost universal criticism that, yeah, this isn't the same. This isn't what we were doing. You know, the students have been used to coming to our facility and talking and philosophizing with each other and griping with each other and doing all the things that we do when we're together socially and you're, 18 to 25 years old. And suddenly we're all in our basements or bedrooms looking at each other on a TV screen. And, clearly Zoom has limitations when it comes to socialization and, normal socialization. Even right now, I mean, I'm talking, everyone's listening. I mean, this is so contrived, right? And, and so our students, after they kind of made the adaptation, a number of them kind of said, okay, we can still get a lot out of this, but still the socialization piece was missing, and that's sort of the looseness of things. And so my staff and I, starting in about mid-April, we set to looking for, how do we solve this problem? Because this, this COVID-19 isn't going away anytime soon. And we were able to find some other applications in the virtual space where we can be with each other in a different kind of way and connect in a different kind of way. And we found an app that is available cross-platform, so iPhones, Androids, everything. It's called Rec Room. I would highly recommend it to everybody. And it's you can create virtual space, and there's a lot of virtual spaces that are already created on there that you can enter into with a group of people, either just people from across the world, like the public, or you can create your own private rooms and sort of navigate your own person, your own avatar through this virtual space. So you can have 20, 30, 100 people in some predefined virtual space. And based on where you are relative to other people, the volume goes up and down in your earpieces. And if someone's on your left, you hear them in your left ear. And if they're on your right, you hear them in your right ear. So they really recreate the whole 3 dimensions. And that way, our students could then go on. We could all be, we created a ski chalet, with a fireplace and these beautiful views of the mountains and things. And there's like different levels. I mean, you could create like a multi-million-dollar mansion. And we could have different students like hanging out in different parts of the mansion. And suddenly, like, you don't like the conversation, and you just navigate yourself away. You go talk to other people. And that more closely mimics, mingling and just kind of spontaneous conversation. And so that then opened our eyes up to the whole virtual reality world and prompted me and some of our staff to buy some of these Oculus Quest headsets. And I'm not on their payroll. And it comes with these hand controllers. And then that opened me up to all new things. There's an app on there called Wander, where it stitches together Google Street views of anywhere in the world. And you can tether your avatar yourself with other people. So we went as a group to Paris this summer. I took the group to New Zealand with me this summer, went to various sites. I told stories. When we went to Paris, we had one of our students tell a story about a particular bridge that she got in trouble on when she was on a class trip there. And you can imagine the kind of connection. I mean, we didn't end up doing this, but with our next group in the fall, we're going to have a day where everyone takes us to their elementary school. And these are 20-year-olds, and tell a story of your first best friend at your elementary school, and like tell that story on location. And you can imagine, how that's so much different than staring at each other on a screen like this. And I can go on and on about all the different kinds of apps that there are in virtual reality, but socialization is one of the big perks to that technology, and it's fun, and you have a shared fun experience together, and what's better than that? And now I'll let Dr. Flamenbaum speak.
And I think, it's like everything we're saying, we're basically taking a developmental perspective, because, the younger kids, like I said, we created all this kind of teachers as directors, creating a lot of fun stuff. The older kids, what we decided, why don't we use this as an opportunity for good pro-social development, but also like, let's create some life skills. So we had, we call it Community Day. It's an end of year kind of event, and the kids decided to collaborate on different things. So the kids did an art show. They all created art, they created labels, they curated it virtually. We did a virtual yearbook. So they're doing all this kind of pro-social group meeting. A couple of kids did, one kid was singing, the other kid playing instruments. So they really, and we see it on TV now. I mean, you just see, they actually just were able to do all this collaborative stuff. Like, what a great skill set to work on to do these kind of things. One girl actually made, as part of her art project, made a clothing line, which is taken off. As a side note, my daughter, who's 14, I had no idea what the hell she was doing all day. She was in her room starting a business. I get checks almost every week that she does all this. It's ridiculous. But also I have to say that, developmentally, what does the adolescent young adult really need is autonomy. And what I live in the suburbs, I have a 17-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter. It was inevitable that yes, we did a lot of the gaming. And by the way, I have no problem with gaming. Like Dr. Goldberg, I think there's all this great collaborative stuff, but even some of the shoot 'em up stuff, first person shooter games, look at the research. Tremendous pro-social development that goes on. You're helping each other. But my son, who's got a driver's license, they started meeting in parking lots, going to Chipotle, just lining up their cars near each other, doing like kids are going to find a way to be near each other. They just had to learn the skills to do it safely. My daughter, they would, we live in the suburbs, so they would walk the rule is you couldn't be on the same side of the street. You don't need to be that close to each other to really engage, but I felt that at some point, the adolescents and young adults needed to be in proximity if they could when things were safe enough. And I'm hearing, let's be honest, and I'm hearing in Long Island, Westchester, kids are doing that. I think it's about like anything else. We use the word healthy. Like, what's a healthy way to do that? What's a healthy way to use screens? So that's my take on that. And I think young people's ingenuity was really cool to see. My daughter's like, she's going to get into a good college. I can tell you that.
She's going to be on Shark Tank. That's what she's going to be good at.
Got her mother's talent. That's all I got.
That's great. That's fantastic. So another hot topic right now is colleges. And Jay, I wanted to see what your thoughts were on, families and how they're thinking through college decisions for the fall. Or actually, I guess most of them have made their decisions, but what is sort of the trends you're seeing around colleges this year?
Sure. It's been a real roller coaster like everything else. There have been families who are planning to go back and colleges releasing information over the summer saying, yes, we'll be open. And then all of a sudden, nope, everything's closed. We're all remote. And so what we're seeing now is a range of fully in-person with modifications. And those modifications are as mild as sort of social distancing requirements, lower density, but everything else is, functioning to some degree, to as extreme as, all kids on campus, or some kids on campus and everybody doing remote learning, even if you're on campus, without common areas and spaces that are open and available. And so we've got that on one end, and then of course completely remote on the other end. And so one of the things that I think is really important that families think about is exactly what I think Dr. Flamenbaum said earlier, which is you've got to study what the actual circumstance is going to be and what is the plan B and the plan C for that. Because if you're sending a student back to campus thinking it's going to be, business as usual, and they can't actually see their friends or they can't participate in the theater, which was their real anchor for them emotionally during college, you're going to end up in a very different circumstance with a student who potentially could be very isolated. And so there's a process that we always recommend to do for families when students are starting any semester. We really recommend that more strongly now, which is essentially looking at the upcoming semester, thinking about, we call it a roadmap for the semester. What's happening, what's important, what are you going to have, what are you not going to have, where are the risks this semester, whether it's academically or socially or even mental health wise or anything, where are those risks, and how are we going to put a plan in place now to support some of those risks? So for example, that might be, well, I'm taking a really tough chemistry class and it's all virtual and I was already going to be tough. And so, you know what, I'm just going to start with a chemistry tutor. Or, you know what, I stopped working with my therapist last year because everything was fine. I know things are going to be challenging, so I'm just going to start the year with my therapist. Things like that. It might just be a trigger that when we hit this point, if things aren't going as well as we hoped, here's how we're going to support. And then creating a communication rhythm between parents and students when students are at college or even when they're at home, where there's some kind of agreed upon, we're going to have a discussion about how this is going at least once a month or maybe once a week for some students, or maybe every day for some students. So really just proactively thinking about that and having that conversation is what we're recommending, given how dynamic the situation is at college. In terms of trends, most of the students we've seen and families we've seen are forging ahead. Some actually wanted a gap year, but schools have made it quite difficult from freshmen into or going into freshman year, in many cases, to take a gap year. Many of them say, look, you can't take a gap year unless you're going to have to reapply. It's not like before where you could easily defer and they take somebody off the wait list. So what this means is most families are moving forward, but they're trying to move forward, at least the ones that we're working with their eyes as wide open as possible, understanding what the risks are, and having at least some kind of scenario planning in place to make sure to mitigate some of those risks as much as possible.
That's really helpful. So Michael, I wanted to turn the conversation to you and see what your thoughts are on supporting people with executive functioning issues and time management issues, particularly those who have alternative learning styles or learning disabilities. You know, I would love to hear a little bit of your thoughts.
Yeah. So I guess first on the big picture, I think on the kind of the biggest level, I'll hark back to kind of the opening about self-regulation, the ability to manage emotions and impulses and so forth. I think it's really good to have realistic expectations. As you said, Evan, we're talking about tofu, not cheese right now. So let's accept that a bit. I was on a panel recently with Michelle Garcia-Winter, who does a lot with social emotional learning, is really, and she said, people, be kind to those teachers, be kind to those kids, and be kind to yourself. Basically, one of the things that's just also important from kind of a brain perspective is that it's not just our kids who are feeling it. It's us as parents. And so if we don't regulate ourselves, then we end up with, because of these mirror neurons, that our kids are able to feel our tension and pick up. So for anyone, any of the families out there that don't know this idea, if you see me smile or laugh and you're like, that's great. And you might feel the tendency to smile or laugh too. You see someone tense, you feel it too. What can happen is when our kids are all flared up and, they're operating from their amygdalas, we can too, and it doesn't go anywhere. So I think the very first thing is for us to model and to regulate ourselves. The thing that I want to do is maybe just share a couple of specific tools that parents, can take with them today. The first is for your kids, very simple thing if they are dysregulated, or if you are, is something called 5-finger breathing. Really basic one. You just, as you breathe in, or as you go, you just trace one hand with a finger from the other hand. Breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. And this is a nice thing because your child can do it if they're anxious during a Zoom call and no one has to see. Just, there you go. Breathing in, breathing out. No one knows. It can be this great thing. They can also, by the way, when they are in person, they can do it in math class too. And no one knows. When they're feeling that anxiety just before a math test, it's fine. Do your 5-finger breathing. So just a good way to get centered, get relaxed. Take a kid who, on the other hand, they have trouble focusing and getting started, for example. So a kid with ADHD, impulsive type, or distracted, very distracted or combined. One thing that's really good is to establish 5-minute goals. And I think this can be really good for either kids who are, so there's kind of your peak performance, which is when you've got just the right amount of stress. There's a little bit of stress that's good, helps us perform and do well at things. But if you're not stressed enough and you're just bored and, I'm tuning out, I'm out here, a 5-minute goal for what could you get done in 5 minutes provides just enough challenge to kind of set up a little bit of just a little bit of jolt. On the other hand, if you've got someone who's very anxious, and rather than saying, look, you need to focus, you need to get this homework done, or you need to focus, and you need to pay attention in class, say, how about you give it 5 minutes? Just see what you could do in those 5 minutes. You're actually just taking a very different tone, but you're using basically the same tool. One is turning it into a game and trying to perform more with a little more push, and the other is taking a little bit of the stress off when they're too anxious. So 5-minute goals can be a real godsend for kids. One more for the kids who are very quick to take a break and then not come back. Something we call next steps, which is to just jot down what's the thing you're going to do when you come back. And this is really nice because a lot of the times the reasons kids don't get started, especially those with ADHD, is because it's not just anxiety, it's they don't know what they're going to do. They don't have a plan. And so to overcome that hurdle once they do have a little bit of momentum and they know what they're doing, and to say, okay, well, when you come, you're going to take a break, it's fine. But what will you do when you come back? Jotting that down, actually writing it down or saying it out loud or both, tells yourself that you've got a plan. And so you don't have to get over that task initiation hurdle as well. It's simply a matter of like sitting down and getting over all the distractibility hurdles, but you don't also have that difficulty in getting started. Those are a few tools to maybe get started. I can, in the breakout sessions, if we have time for that, happy to give more very specific tools for time management, planning and prioritizing, or so forth. And I know everybody here has additional tools that they can add in.
Thank you. And I want to remind the participants, you're welcome to chat in questions if there are specific ones that you have. I'm going to turn it now to Ilan and Evan. I have a question about specifically students. I mean, Michael touched on this with kids with anxiety, but how do you think about the needs and services that are applicable to students who have behavioral health diagnoses? So mental health issues, substance abuse, and I'm particularly thinking about students who are anxious, because that seems to be, we were already on the rise with anxiety rates with young children prior to COVID, and I know that COVID hasn't helped those rates. So I'd be curious to hear, maybe Dr. Goldberg, you can start, and then we can hear from Evan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're all aware, or this isn't surprising, that there was a study that came out looking at data from June and sort of general surveys that they put out to the American population. And it seems that 40% of people have endorsed a significant rise in anxiety and a plummet of their moods since this all began. And so, I mean, how can this not? I mean, this is a great stress on all of us, and every single one of us, whether we're professionals or whether we're 10 years old, we have our breaking point. And in mental health, that's called the stress diathesis model, that sort of anybody can be stressed beyond what they can hold. And so this puts a lot of burden, a lot of stress on everybody. The physical stress of our biological clocks getting kind of turned on their heads and not getting outside and looking at screens like we were talking about, and sleep-wake cycles getting thrown, which then has sort of its physical aftermath, and the mental health stress and the worry and the concern. And I mean, we are in the midst of a pandemic after all, and it makes us look face to face at our own mortality, even if we're relatively young and healthy. And I think that the patient populations or the student populations that I've seen that have really struggled, those that carry mental health diagnoses of depression pre-COVID, they're at high risk of slipping into a depression. Those that have substance use issues pre-COVID are at high risk of relapsing. A variety of different anxiety disorders. This can sort of tip them into a higher anxiety state. So in my private practice, I've certainly been tweaking a lot of meds over the last 6 months. People that were previously stable for months or years at a time, I'm having to go up on doses of their antidepressants and things in order to kind of maintain the stability. I think that also, and I think that we're going to cover this a little later, is there are some people who've really positively kind of risen to this. And I know I gave an example earlier, but those folks that kind of exist on the margins of society, when society as a whole is kind of on the margins of society, they actually feel very validated. I mean, suddenly everyone understands their plight and what they've been struggling with all these years. And I've had some people who we've been working on, breathing techniques and other anxiety reducing techniques for years, who say, oh, I just reach into my toolbox, but it's funny that my neighbor doesn't have that toolbox. And so I do think that there's like a certain validation that's happened with some of my patients and some of my students. Dr. Flamenbaum?
So, yeah, I mean, I remember early on in the sort of lockdown and this all happened, it's obviously it's like this pervasive traumatic event, and but also it happened really fast. It was like boom. And I remember people saying, those of us who were in the city during, after 9/11, it was like that. And in some ways, obviously, it was this awful kind of impact. But there was a significant difference, which is, if you remember after 9/11, a lot of people, what you saw, the restaurants, bars, there was like, people found each other. They were together. They gave each other solace. And I think one of the hardest parts about this pandemic is that our instinct to be near and touch and console each other was really taken away in a lot of ways. And so I think it just made it harder. I do think like all human ingenuity, we find ways to connect. And I love to see the collective creativity. The kids I saw, especially adolescents, that I really had a hard time with, the kids were high acuity cases already. But one of the things keeping them together, the accountability, was direct intervention, coming to a therapeutic school, seeing your therapist all day, being able to go to your psychiatrist's office, versus getting stuck with the family system that was already a stressor. Those kids, I had to hospitalize a few of them. It just became a risk issue that nobody knew what to deal with. We couldn't intervene. So that was a real issue. I think a lot of the kids who had sort of pre-pandemic anxiety, some of them, like the nature of anxiety is it ebbs and flows, and it ebbed for a while. I think it's about the flow. So one of the things we're trying to do with a lot of people who had a lot of baseline anxiety is we're trying to do exposure now. Wear your mask around your house. If I hate wearing the mask. It actually causes me get used to that. Get used to getting up on time. Get used to getting on Zoom wearing a mask. Get used to all of the things. Go walk by your school. Go get online. Wear a mask and do some homework. Do as much as you can to try to simulate that experience so that people can habituate to going back. So we're trying to create a lot of creative exposure opportunities for kids to actually reacclimate, because they are not going to go in that easily. And I think the ADHD population really, I think schools realized they had to titrate back on their expectations. I always think of ADHD, again, it's got a lot of flavors, but generally speaking, it's almost like people with ADHD have a smaller tank, and their tank runs out a little faster, and they need to recalibrate, reset. So with those kids, we actually were like, you know what? You don't have to go to every class. As a matter of fact, your class meets 4 days a week. It's going to meet 2. And those other 2 days, you can drop in and see your teacher. Or we gave them more breaks, more opportunities to recharge. I think we had to really listen to people and see what was going to work for them. Schools have become amazingly accommodating, and I hope that continues. I think young people with problems deserve accommodation. But like if we take the New York private schools writ large, they were always not very accommodating because that was their thing. We're not going to, you accommodate us. Now they're really allowing for credit recovery, pass, fail. We differentiate instruction. Why don't we differentiate our behavioral interventions the same way, which is, I think, where I hope the world goes. So kids with high acute issues, I really felt that was a big problem. They needed people like the O'Connor. They needed people to go in and get near them. They really, really did. Some of this we really could not replace without the direct intervention, is what I saw. But so I think a lot of your students who are going back to school, try to think about ways to expose them so that they can kind of play the scrimmage before they go back to the real game.
Great. No, that's really helpful. I guess I want to throw a zinger question in here. We've got a few minutes before we're going to finalize with a couple of last questions. But one of my questions is, what have been some of the either outrageous requests you've had from families, or maybe not outrageous, but particularly unique requests that you wouldn't have seen in years prior due to the pandemic? or what are creative solutions you've seen with, it could be clients, it could be families you've just encountered who are trying to figure out, you know, what the fall is going to look like for their family in terms of education.
That is a zinger, Arden. I think that, you know, where my mind goes is, you know, we're looking ahead at the fall, and we have one family that's very, very interested. In fact, they've, you know, signed up their son to join us. And I'm now receiving a lot of inquiries around, you know, whether we're going to be performing on-site COVID testing. And if not on-site, then at what frequency are we going to mandate COVID testing? And, you know, for those on the line that don't know our program, so we're located in Wellesley. We are not a residential program, so students most often hail from the greater Boston area, but they live sort of where they live. They come to us Monday through Friday for upwards of about 20 to 25 hours when we are fully in person. And, you know, and so I'm having to kind of talk this mother through this idea that, you know, number one, we're going to be doing 80% of our programming outdoors, physically distanced, you know, taking all the precautions. And so there's really next to no risk when we're, you know, in that surrounding. And then when we come in, we have so much space that we can give 10 or 12 feet to everybody. And, you know, and we're working on other ways of kind of mitigating risk. And it's hard for me to communicate back to her that, you know, we're very different than Boston University, where they have dorms and it's like a 20, you know, we all know what college is. It's 24/7, like living on people. I mean, even during COVID, I mean, okay, everyone has singles, but there's still a lot of communal community time. And so that's, you know, kind of a hard question that I'm trying to navigate is, you know, it's not really appropriate for us to do testing or to mandate testing.
I don't know that we've had anything particularly bizarre, but what I will say is this past weekend, I had 3 people come back to me of my own clients. I mean, you know, so we have a lot of coaches, about 400 coaches, and I don't really see a lot of clients now. I see 1 or 2. 3 clients came back and said, and one was from 6 years ago. He said, I really, I think this is a good time for me to be getting support. I'm glad to see that people are self-aware enough that they're self-referring. But I think that was a surprise because, you know, once in a while, someone will come back and say, it'd be great to get a booster, nice to get some help. But to get 3 in one weekend was really kind of surprising. And I think it speaks to the zeitgeist and the feeling people have of don't know what's coming up, definitely want some help. And so I just think we all need to be just ready for more requests than maybe we would normally have, in spite of the financial situation that everyone's in.
Some families are taking this like as a very much in stride opportunity. We have a family. The dad runs a summer camp actually, and they're really kind of intrepid people. And he's taking his kids. They're going to Montana for the year. They're like, you know what? Let's use this as an opportunity. And I'm really excited by people who see this as an opportunity because they know it's going to end. This will have an end, and use it when you can. You know, parents, we will. When we decided our opening plans, we first thought we want parents to have as much flexibility as possible. And because we did that, they are taking, a lot of them are staying in houses outside of the city. They're going to interesting places, doing interesting things. Our therapy practice, Therapy West is sort of like our outpatient, that has started to really, really rise. And a lot of requests for in vivo work for, we want to do therapy. Can you come to NYU? Can you come out? People are almost like looking for more active therapeutic experience, more than we've seen in a while, which has been sort of interesting. And our therapists are not like confined to a room. Like, great, we'll go to where the action is and do that kind of work. So This is a fluid situation. I think we're going to see all sorts of responses.
We got a fun one this morning. Money is no object. We'd like a live-in tutor. We're currently in one state and we're thinking of moving to this other state far away. And we'd like the person to go with us. So I'm not sure we'll be able to accommodate that one, but I think that's speaks to what I think the stress, like you mentioned at the top. What are the options and what's the stress? And certainly that would be a great option, but it's a needle in the haystack to find the right fit for that.
Thank you for answering my zinger. All right, so we're going to close with the last question being, what aspects of this pandemic have been positive for students and for families? And Michael, I'll pass it to you first, and then we can ping pong it from.
Well, we were talking about this before we began, and I said, well, at least it's not a flesh-eating bacteria. This is honestly, it is a tough question that you pose. That one, the positive. We're looking at the stress that so many people are feeling, but I'll say a couple of things. One is that for our family, we've had a lot more family dinners, a lot more time together. It turns out our family gets along pretty well, so that's good. But if your family is a source of major stress, that can be obviously harder to live in a crowded house. Definitely the creativity people are finding that we've heard about today. And the third is, I think it comes from the pineal gland. One of you guys will tell me if I'm right. The melatonin, right? So, well, my daughter, I've got two daughters. One's a junior in college, one's a junior in high school. The junior in high school, I said, so any upsides? And she said, yeah, I get to sleep on my natural schedule. Getting up at the normal high school time, it's actually not the way that I'm wired. It's not the way I'm made. And I said, yeah, no one is in high school. So I'll go with those.
Definitely. I mean, I'll piggyback on that. I mean, I think it has allowed people to, while we don't get to sleep quite as early, we are sleeping into the day and perhaps a more natural rhythm, at least for some people. We too, as a family, have spent more time together. It's forced my wife and I to be camp counselors more than we ever were, and create, like we created Clue Night, earlier this summer, where we played the game Clue a bunch, and we did it for a few nights in a row, and then we watched the movie that night. And to just kind of get creative on the home front in a way that, like, maybe we were a little complacent, to be honest with you. And I think that it's forcing parents to do that too, and maybe tap into their better selves and to be better versions of themselves. I think it's also a shared catastrophe that we're all going through. And that means something. I mean, it's like, those relationships that are forged under such circumstances will, be more likely to stand the test of time. And so I think that ultimately this really can bring families together and bring out the best in us.
I think that's totally true. Like I live in a place called Larchmont, which is in Westchester, and it's near the ocean. We took all these family walks. I will remember that for a long time. I also, I think I went through what my kids went through. I commute every day. I got more sleep. I got a Peloton, which was like the best thing in the world. But I also kind of fell in love with, this is going to sound weird, with my neighborhood. I never was mindful, never like looked around. And I really enjoyed the closeness of my community, of my family. My son's really into cooking. He cooked great meals. My daughter obviously is becoming a mogul. I don't know what she's doing. And I think, I'll leave on, my note, I think for families, if there's one factor that's so important to get through this, that the foundation for all the things we talked about is just like this, just regulate yourself and be unconditionally loving. We have to connect and support and nurture each other to do anything we have to do right now. And I think that's, even if that means your kid skips class, even if that means whatever it is, that it's got to kind of start there. And I agree with Dr. Goldberg. We're all in the same foxhole. And if we can keep our heads on straight, we will come out of it collectively closer. Working in a school in 9/11, I saw that community get closer. So I'm hoping on a more macro scale that happens as well. And look, let's be honest, we're talking about all of us and families that can do this. And it also makes me understand the difficulty of families that can't. And, you know, I consider all of us here on the front line in helping people because we really need to. So we actually increased our scholarships tremendously. We felt, and my staff really were like, you better do this. And we're like, we're on board. We needed to make ourselves available for some people who couldn't. You know, and if we all kind of do the little bit of that, I think that goes a long, long way.
I echo what everyone said about family. If your family is a family that brings you joy or even some joy, I think we've seen a lot of that. The one thing that I've noticed, and I'm not sure if this is me wanting to see this or actually seeing this, so I'll preface it with that. But in our line of work, we get a lot of families who are so twisted up by the college process. They're so concerned about getting into a particular college and the jumping through all the hoops to get there. And I think the chaos of this generally, and the chaos of it in the college process, has actually allowed for some families, it's made it even worse. But for a lot of families, I think they've just gotten a break from it in a way to be able to step back and say, what are we doing? Like, what is this all for? Like, we're going to try to get into this school. I think somebody said this earlier, get into this great college that's going to cost $75,000 a year or more to sit at home. Like, wait a second. And so I think there's a bit of a wake-up call that's been happening in our particular arena that I think I'm hoping will carry on into going forward into hopefully refocusing on what the true meaning is for getting an education. You know, stepping outside of off the hamster wheel, outside of the status concern. Of course, that's important, but really focusing on what's actually important to learn and grow and develop. So again, I don't know if I'm actually seeing that or hoping I'm seeing that. I think it's probably a little bit of both, but that's definitely some of the bright side of the chaos that we've been in.
So before we wrap up, are there any last comments that anyone wants to make? And then we're going to, as Sydney mentioned, we're going to put screenshot of everybody's contact information, not a screenshot, but a slide with also attachments to the Zoom rooms that you guys can go in your breakout sessions for folks if they have specific questions. But before we do that, does anyone want to wrap up with any last thoughts?
I want to thank you once again, Arden, for organizing this, and your staff for really putting in all the time and effort. You know, I really appreciate being asked to be a part of this, and it was informative for me as well. And I hope that the listeners, that everyone could take at least one or two things from this last hour.
Yeah, cheers to that. It's great, Arden. Thank you so much, Sydney. Thanks, and you know, I really enjoyed the group of you guys. It was great to share this panel time with you.
Thank you. I thank you so much, Arden, for bringing everybody together. And I think I would underline what Dr. Flamenbaum said about taking things from a place of compassion and kindness.
Really great conversation. I mean, I feel like this is a panel. I like talking to the panel as much as presenting what we presented. It was such a great group of people. So thanks for compiling us. And I really hope we continue this conversation.
Thank you all. So for those who are participating, we really appreciate your time and attention. It's getting late in the evening, so we wanted to make our panelists available for a few minutes. You can see on the left part of the screen which breakout sessions they're in. It'll also be in the chat section. Thank you again to everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.